2010 SPIM practice group for CSI. This month we have Gil Letourneau from eSpecs out of Portland, Maine, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the tools that eSpecs is providing to assist, sort of integrating the information and specification aspect of BIM with the content and the model size. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. It looks like we have a pretty clean slate to start with. If anybody has any questions from last month or any comments from last month, feel free to raise your hand. We can address those as we're moving along or afterwards. And then afterwards, after Gil's done, we're going to talk a little bit about some next meeting topics. Some suggestions that we received, some ideas that we have, and sort of run it along and see what people think. So that said, I think we are ready to just jump right into this. So,
Bob?
Yes.
Well, all I was going to say is maybe we should just orient people a little bit that weren't with us last month when we talked about the Specifiers Property Information Exchange project before we turn it over to Gil.
Oh, sure. Yeah, last month we talked about the Specifiers Property Information Exchange, or the SPY project, and essentially that is putting a series of attributes or parameters alongside the uniformat codes to allow kind of a homogenized data set that can be used, so that way you know that there's a certain level of detail and a certain amount of information that's necessary to accurately specify not just what products are going into projects, but why specific projects were selected. So, you can say that every window has these specific attributes, and every door has these specific attributes, and you create a very standardized model process. And that's basically the backbone of SPY. It's a project it's ongoing, where they have a very, very large table that's being fleshed out with all these different attributes for the different product categories. I think that's a pretty good baseline. If you had anything else to add on that, Roger?
Just one thing, Bob. I was going to say, I had one comment that your voice was a little faint, so I don't know if you're on the speakerphone or what, but you sounded clear to me. But
okay, yeah, I switched to a handset, so hopefully that's a little bit clearer.
That is a lot clearer, yeah. Well, the only thing I would add for people that didn't catch last month's meeting, which did include a presentation by Mark Kalin, who was one of the original proponents of this project and offered up the Specifiers property sets to be structured and to be integrated with the modeling environment, is that we have notes from that meeting that were ably taken by Joy Davis that are available on our blog for the BIM practice group at blog.csinet.org. I have that right, Joy?
That is correct, blog.csinet.org. Look for the BIM practice group.
And you can catch the notes from last month's meeting and also a link to the presentation, to a recording of it that includes Mark's presentation from last month, which would give you some more background on SPY. I'm sure Gil will talk about it a little bit in his presentation, and then we'll maybe have a little discussion and questions at the end. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead, Gil, and pass the baton to you.
Very well.
Okay, Gil's screen should be coming up in just a moment. And again, I want to just point out that in the practice group, we are not endorsing one piece of software or set of tools or approaches over another. We're just exploring different ways of solving problems around dealing with the information component of BIM. And Gil, who's the president and CTO of eSpecs, was a participant in the SPI project, the Specifiers Property Information Exchange project, along with CSI, SCIPS, the Specification Consultants and Independent Practice, NIBS, the National Institute of Building Sciences, and the Corps of Engineers. And there were some other companies. I think BSD, Building Systems Design, was involved, but they weren't able to participate in the demonstration. There were some other software companies that were invited, but Gil was the only one who was able to support the presentation. So we're privileged to have him here today to show us how this might work in a world where we have access to product data to integrate with any range of applications. Okay, I'm going to let you take off now, Gil.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let me give you I'm going to assume that most folks have probably not seen the eSpecs program at all, so I want to briefly go over that a little bit. But like Roger said, my name is Gil Letourneau. I'm the CTO here at Interspec, and we make a suite of products called eSpecs, ranging from more simpler sort of specification management tools all the way up to complete BIM integration between BIM model data and specification sections. That's construction specifications, that is. And what you're seeing on the screen here is the eSpecs for Revit application, which is the tool that's used to integrate Revit models and the data within a Revit model. That's the Autodesk Revit program, and master spec standard specification documents. And I don't want to spend too much time on how this works, but I'm going to assume I have a bit of an educated group here, and I believe I do. And so I won't get into too much about what the uniformat standards are and what master format is. I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. So the concept with eSpecs for Revit is to be able to tie together uniformat descriptions from a specific assembly within a Revit model to a number of different sections and products within those sections in a particular project. So I got a project started here. Let me just open that up. But I just want to show you a quick shot of how exactly that's done in eSpecs. And so, and I think it's really nice to be able to get the larger picture of it as well. These associations between the uniformat codes and the specification sections in eSpecs, we call these bindings. And here you're seeing the eSpecs binding manager. And here a user is able to assign a particular uniformat code. In this case, let me select something like drywall with a metal stud. Okay, so if I select this, you can see now on the right-hand side that I've associated it with 3 different sections here from master spec, the non-structural metal framing, the gypsum board, and the interior paint. And I'm able then to go and burrow a little bit deeper and to indicate to the paint section that I'm painting gypsum board and I want a latex system and so forth. So as a user, I can burrow down as deep as I feel I'm comfortable doing into the specification sections themselves and tie them all to a single uniformat description on the left. So what you end up having is a one-to-many relationship, or a network of information all wrapped around this one assembly. Now, to make things a little bit more fun, in addition to those assembly codes, a user also has, and you can see these down below, a sub-list of parameters that could be used to further refine the specifications based upon the parameter content from each of these assemblies. And you can see some fairly standard ones here. I got base coat, finish coat. These have to do with paints and so forth. A model number, a manufacturer's name, might be something that could be used to fine-tune a specific specification section. So the user has the ability then to use these as well. And this is really where the SPI data content plays its biggest role, in that not only do I have the ability to establish an assembly of specifications, but within those assemblies I can establish a field of values that further refine the specification. And it's that SPI data sheet, which I'll be showing you in a second here, that helps me as an architect, as a modeler, as a designer, to determine which of these parameters are important for the process. One of the big issues that I'm seeing today, at least in the Revit environment, is that there's just so much to choose from. As a modeler, as a designer, I may not have the experience to know exactly what kind of information I should be putting into my door or my window families. So at this point, I'm just guessing, or else I'm not putting anything at all in. And so I feel that the SPI data sheets is a really nice way to educate the industry as to what each of these manufacturer trades organizations feel are the important pieces of data that should be entered into any kind of a BIM object. And I think that's going to be huge in making things easier for people in the BIM environment. Let's take a look at that really and see how exactly that comes into play. I'm going to use a very basic example here. This is the actual Autodesk Revit.
Hey, Gil, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Because there's a question that might best be asked right at this juncture.
I think that's the best thing to do, is to ask them right away, because I'm sure others have the same question.
I'll just ask this question for the person. You can either type the questions to me, or if you raise your hand, I can give you the chance to speak. But this question was about the if the assembly includes paint or other finish, can that information automatically be imported to a finish schedule?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Schedules together with the spec sections.
Yes, and currently the way that is done is there are schedules within the BIM environments that allow you to extract data out of the components that are found within that BIM environment. And because eSpecs is drawing from the same basic data set as these schedules are, that is the way those two things are pulled together. So to answer that question, it's more that the specification and the paint sets, or even the hardware sets, is a bit of a reactionary process, that it reacts to what the information in the model is versus someone having to pull that data together externally from the model and try and stuff it in there somehow. So at least with the eSpecs tools, we're sort of in a reactionary mode. We react to the information within the model.
Okay, Greta, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. That's great.
Okay, good.
It's all one big database. That's really
yes. I think that if you really study BIM and where BIM is going, I think that's what the idea is state it once in the same location, and anyone who wants to play the game can go to that location and get that piece of data, so that you don't have a lot of this multiple sources lying around, which may very easily become out of sync. And so that's sort of what the philosophy that we're using here at eSpecs, is a single source of data. Okay, so here I'm going to show you just a quick example. I've got a floor plan of a library in this case, but I've laid in an acoustical ceiling tile. And this is really very generic. I mean, this is probably being done on every project in Revit. And if we wanted to take a quick look at the properties, you can see that the properties of that ceiling range from, the structure of it, the grid, the panels themselves, and so forth. But in a lot of cases, the most that you're going to get is potentially a uniformat assembly code. And even then, that's kind of sketchy. So eSpecs, the first thing we do is make it very easy for the Revit user to establish an appropriate assembly code for each of their major assemblies. That's very important because we want to create specification manuals on a system approach basis. We want to take a holistic approach to writing the first draft of the spec, and that is, tell me what the systems are, and that's a good starting point for me to start pulling that spec together. At some point, and here is the eSpecs component that's built into the Revit tool, at some point I'm going to want to make an export, or I'm going to take an action to send all of my BIM information over to eSpecs so that it can start gathering this specification information. Okay? Now, before I do that, however, as a modeler, I probably really want to make sure that my data is accurate. You know that old statement, junk in, junk out. Well, it doesn't, that doesn't change here either. So I want to make sure my ceilings have the correct information in them. Now, without something like the SPI property sets, that starts to get a little bit confusing because as a modeler, I'm not really sure what I need to tell people about the ceiling so that they can get their work done. And what I mean by their work done, it could be anything from engineering calculations, from energy loss, sound, calculations, specification writing, cost estimates. All of these things are what we call downstream applications of the BIM model. And these downstream applications require that sort of basic setting, that at least start from a standard starting point. And in a lot of cases, it becomes the uniformat standard because it allows people to deal with larger components, system-based approach. I hear a lot of talk from folks that say, well, what if we just use keynotes? Can't we just generate stuff from keynotes? And I suppose you could, but in my experience, the keynotes tend to come in quite later in the project. And so that's sort of a bit of a problem. The other thing that keynotes generally are identifying parts and pieces of larger components, and that can tend to be a little bit overwhelming when you're trying to gather a lot of information about a spec. So we feel the uniformat code is probably the best approach. I've seen also recently the use of the Omni-class numbers, and that's a very good help as well, but I still feel that's in addition to the uniformat code. The Omni-class can help refine the systems or the particular pieces within a particular system.
Gil, can we stop there for just a minute? When you say the Omni-class code, you mean if you were to sort of use an additional classification like for the products or?
Yeah, a perfect example would be, say I have a window in a project, and I might establish that window in uniformat as a wood window. Okay, well, if I looked at the Omni classes, that classification for that window might appear in several locations. It might appear in double hung windows. It might be appropriate in casement windows. It also might have wood windows, aluminum windows, established in the materials portion of Omni-class. Mm-hmm. So if I look at Omni-class to really define that window, it may be that I need more than one to correctly define what that complete, that assembly is. And so in this example, I would probably set the uniformat class or classification to say wood windows, and then use the Omni class to determine the type, the double hung, the casement, and that sort of thing. So those two things in tandem can really help me define that product down pretty well. In addition to that, I might have additional parameters that might identify the finish on the window, the glazing type on the window, and that sort of thing. Okay, so again, back to the ceiling. Now, as a modeler, I don't really know what needs to go into this ceiling, but I can find out, and I can do that here in eSpecs by downloading the SPY property content. And what does that mean exactly? Well, what that means is, as a designer, I'm going to click this button, and I'm going to go out to a website that lists for me, mostly it's manufacturers' websites. Here I'm looking at USG, and I've got a small sample. Okay, I've got 3 different ceiling types that I could use here. I can use the Aspen, I can use the Brio, Climber Plus. So these are some products that USG has put up for me that I can choose from, which will send to me the standard SPY properties for each of these products. All right? So let's go through that process. So let's say as a designer, I think this Aspen looks reasonable to me. Random texture, good sound quality, that's basically what I'm looking for. So I'm going to select the image here, and what you'll see is now eSpecs pulls down from the web, from the manufacturer site, all of the SPY data for this particular product. If I click on the property sets for the panel ceilings, you can see some standard elements here. Here's the panel size. All right, so I can go ahead and add the panel size to the model because maybe the panel size is an important thing to know. The edge condition would be important to know if it's a reveal or square. I even have the suspension system, which is in this case intermediate duty. So these are all values that the manufacturer is passing to me as a help to determine the correct criteria for that particular Aspen product. Let's look at, now I also have color, so it's telling me that you can get it in white, so I'll go ahead and maybe add color. The material for Aspen is a water-felted mineral fiber. You know, these are very important pieces of information, but as a designer, I would never know that. I would have no idea that the Aspen has this type of material in it. So this might be very valuable for me to put into the BIM model because, again, a downstream application may require the material of the panel to do calculations on sound prevention and sound transmission. So this is what really we're getting to here. So I go in as a designer and I select from this list of non-proprietary information, and I'm going to enter that into the ceiling.
Okay, Gil?
So go ahead.
Yeah, it's Roger. I just wanted to ask you, so back on that screen, the P sets, the 3 different P sets, those came from the work we did in SPY to connect properties to the IFC model, and those are P sets from IFC for types of properties. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then the values are the property classes for each of those property sets, right? And so,
that's correct.
And did these come from, these are a combination of what was in the IFC model for each of those property classes and what we put up as part of the SPY work for ceilings?
That's correct.
So has this been augmented by USG at all, or is this just the standard property sets from SPY? And if I'm off, if this is something you're going to cover later, just tell me to
Oh, that's a very good question. I was just going to mention that the beautiful thing about getting these property sets is they're not proprietary. You know, so USG did not come up with these values or these parameter sets. It's the the manufacturer's association, will come together and determine what the correct property sets should be for each of these product types. That makes it an even playing field for all of the manufacturers. So in this case, all of the manufacturers will be able to provide the data for each of these types of information. So anybody who makes an acoustic ceiling panel can provide the shape or the width, okay, or the nominal height of each panel, and those kinds of things, the color. So there's nothing here that's specific to USG other than the fact that they have filled in these values, these standard placeholders, with their specific information. In this case, the manufacturer, USG, has filled in with the USG manufacturer name. But every manufacturer will have the same manufacturer field for them to be able to fill in.
And at this point, in the case of USG, you've worked with them directly to create this sample data that you're using here, right? The SPY
That's
project
correct.
hasn't really gotten to ceilings
That's correct.
yet.
Right. So what we did is we took the standard SPY property sheet template, which we got off the Building Smart website, and we sent it to them and said, fill in the values for a couple of your ceiling products and send it back to us. And that's basically what they did. And so we're using that as a sample set for this demonstration.
Gil,
Yep.
what happens when USG changes those values?
Then it's their responsibility, I believe, to go in and make sure their SPY data sheets have been updated.
So the next
now,
time
what
you
happens
get
if
back, you would be
it's
able to
been
get
updated since I used it in a model?
Yeah.
Well, the SPY property sheet has a field in it that allows the user to link back to the latest version. So one of the standard fields in the property sets is a source material field where anyone can go back and get the latest at any point in time. But as far as I know, it is the manufacturer's responsibility to maintain their SPY sheets.
Yeah, and right now the SPY data, someone wanted to know how they can get access to it if they don't use eSpecs. Right now, the whole building design guide website has all the SPY classes. At this point, there are only, I think, a couple of manufacturers that have started to work with this and provide data. General Electric, I know, is one of them because we worked with electrical products initially. So the data isn't really available yet. It's coming, or we hope it's coming if this project continues to move forward and be successful. And I guess Sheldon, I'm going to let you just speak up, and I'll let you speak here and let you continue on your question about what happens when things change mid-screen. Sheldon? Are you there? You should be unmuted. Well, Gil, while Sheldon is, I don't know if he's going to speak or not, but his other question was kind of on the point of, you could get caught if these things change in a project that's already been designed and you've plugged something in, and what do you do about that? I don't know what the answer is, but.
I don't know what the answer to that is either. And it could become a problem if the changes to the products are made in between the time of design and the time of bidding, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, you always have the risk that things could change in any kind of a design, I guess, and the product may no longer be available. And I guess there's another question about how this would work in a competitive bid situation. Are you locking yourself into one manufacturer when you start to work at this level?
I think that's a great question. I can only speak to that question from an eSpecs point of view, right? But what eSpecs allows you to do is, because of the bindings that you set up beforehand between the assemblies and the sections, you as a user determine what subset of manufacturers that you would like the system to choose from. And that can be anything from any of them to down to 1, 2, or 3. In this particular case, I actually went in and chose to pick the manufacturer, here, the USG field. But that's not mandatory. I would not have to do that. I could leave this field completely blank, and eSpecs would generate for me a specification that matches as close as it can with the material types, but it would leave the manufacturer up to me to choose, and I could choose more than one. Does that answer that question?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that none of this information is mandatory. You know, I can pick and choose what kind of data I'd like to put into my model at any given time. I can always go back and update it later. And the idea I always have is, you know, put data in the model that you need to do your job with. You know, don't necessarily fill it full of whatever you can imagine, because it may not be necessary, and it may just be overkill. So I'm interested in writing a spec, so I'm going to pick the information that I need to get a spec written. Later down the road, if someone's doing cost estimating, they may have to go in and fill in this cost field here and put in a value for the cost on the ceiling. Okay,
Bill,
but that's a discussion for another day. Okay, any more questions about that? Okay, what I wanted to show you here, if I look now at the properties of the ceiling, you can see that all of these fields here, this other information, all came from the SPY data set. Okay, so this now, my ceiling in the Revit model now, has a lot more valuable information in it than it did before. And
Gil?
these kinds of information is exactly what people are struggling with. They don't know that this is a good set of, you know, values to put into your model.
Now,
That's
Gil,
why
we
we're
had a
getting
question
kind of
about,
junky models out there.
Gil, we had a question about whether this has to be Revit or would it also work in Bentley, and I guess the answer is it could. It just isn't at this point.
Correct. It takes someone very smart and intelligent like me to put it together.
And you don't, I mean, your product at this point doesn't integrate to Bentley, to MicroStation, just to Revit, right?
To Revit at this point. We're supporting Revit in the Autodesk AutoCAD architecture at this point, those two major products. But
the goal
keep in
of
mind,
having
all
this
of the
data,
BIM
like this
products
data,
out there are going to have this parameter-based approach. So though I haven't personally run the Bentley systems, I could almost guarantee you that if you open up a ceiling object in the Bentley system, you will see parameters very similar to this.
Yeah, and I was going to add that's our goal for doing this through Building Smart and SPY projects, to have an open set of data standards that could be embedded into any program. We're just showing you what Gil has done to take advantage of that.
Okay, so you know, that's really where the rubber hits the road, right? I got valuable information. It's accurate. Why is it accurate? Because it came directly from the manufacturer. So I know that, you know, the information I'm putting in here is valid. The assembly code is set correctly. So everything looks good. And just to kind of close the loop, I will go in here, and now I'm going to update the eSpecs specs, which means I'm going to send this new information out to eSpecs. I don't need to use MEP, so I'll turn those off. Okay, so let's just deal with architecture right now. And I'll go ahead and send that out. Now, what eSpecs is doing is it's querying this BIM model, and it's pulling out the assemblies. Okay, I'm not really interested in graphics. You know, I don't really care what the graphic pattern is for the brick. That's more of a visual sort of thing. I'm more interested in the core information. So here's grabbing the library shelves, and you know, this is actually a much larger model than you see here. There's quite a bit of other stuff in here. I could have probably limited it down to a few of the categories. That's okay.
So let me see if we have any other questions.
Okay, so that's updated the information.
Gil, there's a question about the properties and whether when you're extracting them, do you have to use the ones you've extracted, or can you use a combination of one, putting in values as well as extracting values from this data that's provided? In other words, can you fill in those properties yourself at any point?
I'm not sure exactly the crux of the question. You mean the properties on an
object?
On an object?
Yeah.
The properties on an object, at least in Revit, there's going to be a core basic set that comes with every object, and it's up to the modeler then to include additional values or parameters, and they have the choice as to what those parameters should be. That's a nice thing, but also that could be a problem because a lot of people are inventing a lot of parameters that don't mean anything to anybody. So that's sort of
But also at the same time, people are inventing parameters that mean a lot to a lot of people.
Say again?
Bob, is that you? We can't. It was hard to hear.
Yeah, I think to say that people are inventing parameters that don't mean anything to anybody, that might be true. But there's also people that are adding parameters that do apply to a lot of areas that are not taken into consideration directly from the Revit model.
Absolutely, absolutely. Otherwise it would be useless to have any parameters. So, yes, there's definitely a good collection of information in a majority of these models. All I'm saying in stating that is that unless someone has, especially the more inexperienced folks, and there are a lot of them, unless they have some guidance as to what information is actually important to people, it's very difficult for them to determine that on their own. And so
this is where the specifier comes in.
For me, the biggest asset for something like the SPI standards.
Gregory
Even if they're not
Collins,
complete.
I don't know if this was your question that started this. I unmuted you if you want to add anything. I don't know if we quite answered it or not.
Yes, Roger. To a certain degree, the question I would have is, with the goal, the apparent goal of trying to get a completely organized team focused on the project early on, which is the benefit from BIM and as well as IPD and other other technologies and procedures and processes are coming in place now. I don't see why these things wouldn't be determined early on, let's say in a schematic design stage, so that they can be populated as far as those parameters and properties rather than utilizing the SPI package or something like that.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and I think if you put the two hand in hand, you end up with a winning combination by organizing this stuff based on the SPI during schematic design,
or during the invention of the component. In other words, in Revit, for example, they're out of the box. If I just purchased it and installed it, there is no recess entrance mats, right? It doesn't come with the program, so I have to make one. So in the process of making one of these components, it would be nice to put the fields in there at the time I create it, and then subsequently any modeler from then on that needs a recessed floor mat doesn't have to have all that extra time to put in these parameters. They're already been filled in for him, even though they can kind of modify them and add to them. It makes the process a whole lot easier.
Bill, you had a question. I'll just let you ask it.
Are you talking to me?
Bill Dickens?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Well, I had one quick question. In building the model, how do they quickly convey the information to your system? And what's the link? What's the actual technical link? You're making a drawing.
The link is when I go into the eSpecs palette and I say update the eSpecs specs, what this component does is it gathers the information, mostly the assemblies, and then inserts it into a Microsoft SQL server that's sitting somewhere in the office.
No, that's not my question.
Oh, okay.
My question is more specific. I'm building a model, and all of a sudden I decide that I'm going to do what traditionally was called a reflected ceiling plan. And so I start drawing that. How do I link this with your system?
Correct. Yeah, you click this button here, this update
Okay.
specs. Okay.
Oh, so
And what it will do is look at the project. Okay. And it's going to look for, let's see, oh, no, I got the wrong one. Hold on. It's going to tie in the project name. Okay, so what Revit will do is say, here's the data, here's the project the model is working with, and what eSpecs will do is associate the model information to the project at that database. And that's the tie between the two.
okay. Okay, the other quick question, I'm sure you've handled it, but I don't know exactly how you've handled it. When you're doing a project, if you're doing it in the more traditional way, the old-fashioned way, you'd be doing some schematic design for the owner's approval, and you would want schematic specs handed to them for their approval. Now, some owners are very sophisticated and they have specific ideas as to what they want, and they might go over it and change a few things. So how do you quick output a schematic spec, and to what level does that go?
All right, sure. I can give you a quick shot of it. If I look in the reports here in eSpecs, you see there's an executive summary report. That's, if I go ahead and run that executive summary report will do exactly that. It will, let's turn that off. I don't need that. Turn a few of these off just to make it a little easier. I don't need furniture, entourage, planting, and site. Let's turn those off. Okay, so what it will do now is generate for me an outline spec based on the products in the model and the correct associations with the uniformat code to the specification sections.
Okay.
So let's take a look at that.
Well, that's kind of nice.
Now, also I want to mention that you could have several types of sections or base documents that you're linking to. So one set of documents you could tie eSpecs to is an outline spec. And it would work, the same way in eSpecs. Instead of generating the full-length master spec, it would generate the outline spec.
Well, now, what's the difference between an outline spec and a schematic spec?
I think it's probably the same. The outline spec may have a little bit more information in there, but not a whole lot. Okay, so here you see this little report here, right? So it's going to go down through and list every section, the submittals expected for each section, quality assurance, the products that are currently in that section.
I think that's more detailed than what I would expect. Yeah.
Here's the unit masonry. It's just saying I've got face brick.
Yeah.
Okay. In some sections, like here's the brick masonry section, it can get a little bit more detail: Portland cement, lime mix, asphalt,
No, you're not
copper
going to show that.
flashing.
Not at that point in time. You're not going to show them that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This may be even more
It'll be very
information you
basic,
need.
Yeah.
And you could save this out and edit it and send it off.
Sure. Okay, well,
Gil,
I'm curious.
just to let you know, we got about 10 minutes or so left, so I don't want to.
I'm just about there. I'm going to go here into eSpecs. I just want to close the loop. So here I'm going to go to the BIM menu. I'm going to say refresh the section list. And that'll go through the process then of generating the draft specs for that model. And I wanted to just quickly open up the acoustic ceiling panel section and show you how the SPI data has actually informed the spec. Takes a few seconds, but it's a lot quicker than if I would do it by hand.
Quite a bit.
Now again, though, I mean, you have to remember that, you know, if there's not very good information in the model, of course, it's very difficult to generate anything of value. But if someone does take the time and discipline to create a very nice BIM model, the benefits of that down the pipe, you know, downstream, are huge. You can't imagine how much power that can potentially have.
And what you're saying, that one of the advantages or the potential advantages, if we're able to move this out, is that the SPI project would provide a way to have some structured, organized information in a model, right?
That's correct. I mean, let's just stay with the ceiling as an example. I'm just saying about the specification right now, but there are going to be people that are looking for, you know, sound transmission qualities, or they may be looking for lead information. They may be looking for cost information. Well, if everyone is going to the same location and can expect to have the same bucket of information, then software can actually work pretty well. But if each software provider has to invent their own location for this information, then you get nothing, you know, you get no real interoperability at all. I mean, everybody's sort of inventing their own thing. So having a standard set of parameters allows every discipline to sort of know where that piece of information is going to be. And they're going to be able to go retrieve it the same way as everyone else.
Gil, one question I have here is about if you have any plans to work with, I don't even know if you're aware, but we're in the process of developing a preliminary project description format, which would accompany the uniformat that would have a structured way to write a schematic or a concept specification. So I don't know if you have any thoughts of having or developing that kind of supporting language to go along with your guide specs at the detailed level.
Yes, what we're looking to do in the next couple of years is to incorporate a little bit more of building programming into the process, which would be organized around that preliminary project description document. And the idea is that how do I know at the end of a BIM process where I'm ready to go to bid, how do I know I've got everything I'm supposed to have in that model? I mean, do the rooms have the right components? Are the doors the right type for the different rooms that they enter to? Well, that sort of all stems originally from the programming information and from that PPD. And so that currently, I'm not seeing a really good process of getting that information into the BIM model so that it can be queried later for quality assurance reasons. And I think the specifications is part of that, but it's not the complete story. I mean, there are other things to think about in terms of quality assurance than just do the specs tied to the drawings. And so that's probably where we're going to be spending some time in the next few years.
We did have a question about how this project fits in with other Building Smart projects, the SPI project. Maybe I'll comment and you can add to that, Gil, but what you didn't see in the background here, we saw a little glimpse of it, I think, when we saw those key sets or property sets, is that there was work done to coordinate the SPY property sets with the property sets in the IFC model. And the IFC model is sort of the core exchange model for open exchange of BIM models. And had connected the SPY properties to the IFC property sets, and then the work of the project was to work with the manufacturers to see what else they need to add to that and still keep it all connected to the IFC property sets. So that is happening in the background, and that will support these properties being available to IFC-based modeling tools. One of our next goals with the project is to take those property set classes and get them into the IFD library so they can be standardized in IFD library, and that can be a way to make them available to everyone to access. So that's sort of where we're going next in terms of trying to use standards for this project. And it is the actual start of this SPY project was to support the COBE project, which is another one of these related standards developments that's trying to provide the data at the end of the project that the building owner can use to operate their building. So the original idea here was there needed to be some data from product manufacturers to help the owner, and the best way to get it in was to start early in the process of establishing what was needed in the specification. So that's really where the SPY project got its start. So that's all tied together in the background through Building Smart.
So you can see here now, this is the acoustic panel ceilings, and you can see that, we have just the USG highlighted here, but, the other manufacturers could be added as well, manually. So it's not, restrictive. And so USG is highlighted as a manufacturer, and this is the type and mineral-based information that came directly from the SPY property field. And so I think this is probably the best example of what we just did, of all these different types, that one field in the SPY property set was able to establish this requirement for that specific ceiling. And that's sort of what excites me. This is the big ta-da for me. So that sort of closes the loop here in terms of coordination between Revit families, specification information, and standard SPY datasheet property sets. And I guess that's my presentation. There is a hyperlink to this, a similar presentation to this, on the Building Smart website. I think you can find it under the presentation. Roger, was it the December? I guess it was December presentation.
Yeah, from the Building Smart meetings in December. Yeah, if you go on to buildingsmartalliance.org, I think it is. Behind that, you Google Building Smart Alliance, you'll be able to get to it for sure.
You can also see much more about these products on especs.com, and there are also some small video demonstrations if you wanted to download those and watch them as well. But other than that, I say thanks and open to questions.
Yeah, Greg Collins, you had an interesting question. If you want to speak up, maybe this will be a good transitional question.
Yeah, just from the standpoint of the way that modeling and building information modeling in particular is going, and the use of 3D and 4D and 5D capabilities built into the model, do you see the typical use of specifications being replaced more and more by the information contained within the model itself? I mean, we're getting away from the 3 and 4 books being associated with all the drawings.
I don't see that happening for a very long time, and the reason is you don't really need to have that much information in the BIM model. I certainly don't need to have, submittal requirements and insurance requirements and that sort of thing. Now, until the industry goes away from requiring that sort of a strict process of construction, I think we're still going to need, in terms from an attorney's point of view, probably still going to need the spec manual. I would love to have, my vision someday is to have the information in it that's currently in spec sections be digitally dynamic. There's no reason with the development of these types of SPI data sheets and other types of standards like this, that rather than go and get the fields and put them into my model, I can see the day where the model will actually go to the location and query it on its own and present you with the data at runtime or when you need it, rather than storing everything in a big, huge file. But that's going to be a while.
Thanks.
I personally still see the BIM models like the Revit models as analogous to like a website, where it may not be necessary to retain all of that information as long as the model knows where to go get it when I need it, just like a hyperlink on a web page. And I still think that's probably where things are going to go.
Yeah, well, definitely remains to be seen, but we are coming up on time now. So, Gil, I do appreciate your coming out to speak to us about this. It's pretty amazing stuff, and you know, you can definitely see that it's a brave new world out there.
Sure.
So with that, I appreciate everybody coming out to listen, and I guess we will talk to you in about a month. Roger, do you have anything further that you need to add?
Well, just to say, I think we'll be having our next meeting on March 19th. We'll be sending out the invitations to everyone, and thank you. If you do have any questions or comments, I have my email address. Oh, there we go. That's the email address. So you can send those here to Bob, myself, or Joy, and we'll get back to you. And if you want to get connected to Gil in some way, send me a note, and I'll be happy to connect you over to Gil as well. And we will be posting the notes from this session and a recording of it on the blog, so you can also follow up there. So I think that's it. Thanks a lot. Offer my thanks to you also, Gil. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your work with us today. It's interesting and helpful to see applications really working on information and how to make the most of it.
Okay. Well, you're welcome.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in a month.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.